In the early 2000s, Shia LaBeouf was positioned as one of Hollywood's safest young bets. He was talented, energetic, relatable, and already experienced in front of the camera, while most child actors were still trying to survive their first transition into adulthood. His rise didn't look accidental, it looked engineered for longevity. Which is why what followed confused audiences, studios, and even LaBeouf himself. Shia LaBeouf was born on June 11, 1986 in Los Angeles, California. His childhood was unstable from the start. His parents separated early, and he was largely raised by his father, Jeffrey LaBeouf, a Vietnam War veteran who struggled with drug addiction and erratic behavior. Money was inconsistent, and Shia has repeatedly described growing up in a chaotic environment where survival required constant adaptation. Performing became less about fame and more about escape. At just 10 years old, LaBeouf began doing stand-up comedy at small clubs, often using adult humor well beyond his age. He later admitted that much of his early ambition was driven by the need to financially support himself and his family. That drive led him to television. After a series of small roles, LaBeouf landed the part of Louis Stevens on Disney Channel's Even Stevens in 2000. The show became a major hit, running for 3 seasons and turning him into a recognizable face for an entire generation. Unlike many Disney child stars, LaBeouf wasn't boxed into a single personality type. His comedic timing was sharp, physical, and unpredictable. In 2003, he won a Daytime Emmy Award for his performance, reinforcing the idea that he was more than just a network-created star. Hollywood took notice quickly. That same year, LaBeouf starred in Holes, a film adaptation that allowed him to show emotional range beyond comedy. The performance marked an early turning point. He wasn't just surviving the child actor transition, he was actively expanding his credibility. Over the next few years, he deliberately pursued roles that distanced him from his Disney image. Films like A Guide to Recognizing Your Saints and Bobby placed him alongside respected actors and demonstrated his willingness to explore darker, more complex material. By 2007, LaBeouf had successfully crossed into mainstream leading man territory with Disturbia, a commercial hit that proved he could carry a film outside the family-friendly space. That same year, his career reached a new level when he was cast as Sam Witwicky in Transformers. Directed by Michael Bay and produced by Steven Spielberg, the film became a global phenomenon. Transformers grossed over $700 million worldwide and instantly elevated LaBeouf into blockbuster status. At just 21 years old, he was the face of one of the most profitable franchises in modern cinema. Success came fast and relentlessly. LaBeouf starred in Transformers, Revenge of the Fallen and Transformers, Dark of the Moon, both massive financial successes despite mixed critical reception. Studios trusted him. Audiences recognized him. He was cast opposite Harrison Ford in Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, a clear signal that Hollywood viewed him as a generational successor. On paper, his career trajectory was exactly what young actors hoped for. But cracks were already forming beneath the surface. As his fame increased, so did public incidents. In 2007, LaBeouf was arrested after refusing to leave a Chicago Walgreens, later pleading guilty to misdemeanor disorderly conduct. In 2008, he was involved in a car accident that resulted in injuries to his hand and subsequent DUI-related charges. Though some charges were eventually dropped, the pattern of legal trouble began to follow him. These incidents didn't immediately derail his career, but they began shaping a narrative that contrasted sharply with his professional success. Behind the scenes, LaBeouf was becoming increasingly vocal about his dissatisfaction with blockbuster filmmaking. He criticized studio processes, distanced himself from the Transformers franchise, and publicly questioned creative decisions on projects he had once enthusiastically promoted. His honesty earned some respect, but it also labeled him as difficult. In an industry built on reliability, unpredictability carries consequences. By the early 2010s, LaBeouf's public image began to shift from talented young star to volatile and erratic. In 2013, he was accused of plagiarizing a graphic novel for his short film HowardCantor.com. When the similarities were exposed, his responses, some of which were later revealed to be plagiarized apologies, further damaged his credibility. What could have been a contained controversy escalated into a broader conversation about accountability and self-awareness. Later that year, LaBeouf appeared at public events wearing a paper bag over his head with the words, "I am not famous anymore," written across it. The moment went viral. To some, it looked like performance art. To others, it looked like a breakdown happening in real time. Either way, the perception of Shia LaBeouf was no longer controlled by his film roles. It was being shaped by headlines, memes, and unanswered questions about his stability. By the time LaBeouf exited mainstream franchises, the industry was no longer sure what version of him it would get. And for the first time since his childhood, the momentum that had always carried him forward began to stall. As Shia LaBeouf moved away from mainstream studio projects, his behavior became increasingly intertwined with performance art, public provocation, and personal volatility. What initially appeared to be an attempt to reclaim creative control slowly blurred into a pattern that confused audiences and alienated industry decision-makers. The line between art, protest, and self-destruction was no longer clear. In 2014, LaBeouf joined the Broadway revival of Cabaret. During its run, he was arrested after disruptive behavior inside the theater, reportedly refusing to leave and causing a disturbance during the performance. Witnesses described him as intoxicated and aggressive. The incident reinforced an image that had been quietly forming for years: immense talent overshadowed by impulsive behavior. While Broadway and independent film communities are often more forgiving than Hollywood studios, reliability still matters. LaBeouf was becoming increasingly difficult to ensure, cast, or trust with high-profile productions. That same year, LaBeouf launched a series of performance art projects in collaboration with artists Nastya Sade Runka and Luke Turner. The most visible of these, He Will Not Divide Us, was intended as a live-streamed anti-authoritarian statement. Instead, it quickly became a magnet for online harassment, trolling, and real-world interference. The installation was repeatedly disrupted, shut down, relocated, and ultimately abandoned. What was meant to be a statement about unity and resistance became another public spectacle, further detaching LaBeouf from conventional artistic narratives. During this period, LaBeouf also spoke openly about his struggles with alcohol, emotional instability, and identity. In multiple interviews, he acknowledged cycles of self-sabotage and admitted that fame had accelerated unresolved trauma from childhood. He described his upbringing as chaotic and said that early success prevented him from developing emotional tools needed for adulthood. These admissions generated sympathy from some corners of the public, but they did little to slow the erosion of his professional standing. The most serious turning point came in December 2020 when musician and actor FKA Twigs filed a lawsuit accusing LaBeouf of abuse during their relationship. The allegations included claims of emotional distress, control, and physical harm. LaBeouf responded by acknowledging past mistakes and stating that he had been abusive to himself and others, while also disputing aspects of the claims. The lawsuit immediately placed his career into suspension. Projects were paused, roles were reassigned, and studios distanced themselves. In an industry already cautious about risk, the allegations made him effectively uncastable in the short term. Following the lawsuit, LaBeouf entered rehabilitation and began publicly addressing his behavior in interviews. He described himself as an alcoholic in recovery and expressed remorse for the harm he said he caused. These statements were not framed as a public relations campaign, but as attempts at accountability. Even so, the industry response remained guarded. Hollywood has historically allowed comebacks, but only after time, silence, and legal clarity. That clarity arrived in July 2025 when LaBeouf and FKA Twigs reached a private settlement. The lawsuit was dismissed with prejudice, bringing the legal case to a permanent close. The settlement did not erase public memory or industry hesitation, but it did mark an endpoint in the most damaging chapter of his career. By that time, LaBeouf had already spent years outside the mainstream spotlight. Professionally, his output shifted towards smaller projects and selective appearances. One of his most notable recent roles was in Francis Ford Coppola's Megalopolis, a long-gestating film that finally reached release in 2024. The project placed LaBeouf among an ensemble cast rather than positioning him as a leading figure. While the film itself divided critics, His participation signaled that some filmmakers were again willing to work with him, albeit cautiously and without the expectations once attached to his name. LaBeouf's relationship with fame has also fundamentally changed. He has spoken about embracing structure, faith, and routine, and about rejecting the chaos that once defined his public persona. Unlike earlier phases of his career, he has not aggressively pursued attention or attempted to reframe himself as misunderstood. Instead, his presence has become quieter, more controlled, and largely removed from the spectacle that once followed him everywhere. So what really happened to Shia LaBeouf? The answer is not a single scandal, arrest, or headline. It is the accumulation of unresolved trauma, early fame without stability, creative ambition colliding with self-destructive behavior, and an industry that eventually stopped extending chances. His talent was never the issue. From childhood, LaBeouf demonstrated an ability to command attention, convey emotion, and disappear into complex roles. What changed was the tolerance for unpredictability once the consequences became impossible to ignore. LaBeouf's story is not one of disappearance, but of contraction. The scale of his career narrowed, the margin for error vanished. What remains is a gifted actor navigating the aftermath of choices made under extreme pressure and public scrutiny. Unlike many former child stars, he did not fade quietly. His unraveling happened in public in real time, with the internet watching every misstep. Whether his legacy becomes one of redemption, caution, or unfinished potential remains unresolved. What is clear is that Shia LaBeouf's rise and fall cannot be reduced to a meme or a single controversy. It is a complex case study in fame, accountability, and the cost of growing up in front of an audience that never forgets. The story of Shia LaBeouf is not over, but it is no longer being written at blockbuster scale. And perhaps, for the first time in his life, that reality is exactly what allows it to continue.